Our final speaker of the day is becoming a regular at Hillsdale College events. Donald Rumsfeld served as the 13th and the 21st United States Secretary of Defense. He currently chairs the nonprofit Rumsfeld Foundation along with his wife, Joyce. A graduate of Princeton University and a former naval aviator, his list of accomplishments is long and impressive. Allow me to mention just a few. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives at the age of 30 and was reelected 3 consecutive times. He held high-level positions in the administrations of 4 U.S. presidents, and he has been chief executive officer of 2 Fortune 500 companies. His many honors and awards include All-Navy Wrestling Champion, which I think was probably excellent preparation for dealing with the White House press corps, especially during the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. He is also the recipient of the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award and the nation's highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's an author. He wrote a best-selling memoir, Known and Unknown, and he recently wrote a second best-selling book, Rumsfeld's Rules, Leadership Lessons in Business, Politics, War, and Life. He has graciously agreed to sign copies of this book, Rumsfeld's Rules, immediately following his talk today. The signing will take place in Plaza Ballroom B, which is right next door to this room. Finally, I would be remiss if I neglected to mention that Mr. Rumsfeld and his wife Joyce, who have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a great-granddaughter, were married in 1954, which means they are celebrating 60 years of marriage this year, and I think that's worth congratulating them on. He will be speaking today on the topic Leadership Lessons in Business, Politics, War, and Life. Please welcome former United States Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Donald Rumsfeld.
Thank you, sir. Rumsfeld, thank you. Good to see you. Thank you. My goodness, greetings. Thank you. Well, I just had a chance to hear some of Mr. Shapiro's comments. And it called to mind an event I attended when I was old enough to know better. And the speaker before me finished his remarks by showing the video of the U.S.-Russia hockey match when the Americans beat them. And walking in here after that very interesting, clever individual is a bit like that. Wow, does he say it? Well, thank you very much, Timothy and Larry Arnn and members of the faculty, the administration, supporters of Hillsdale. Good for you. What you do is worthwhile. It's important. Our country needs the products of this fine institution. I guess I left government about for the 3rd or 4th time some years back, and as Tim said, I have a foundation where we do support for military charities, microfinance around the world, graduate fellows, people who don't have the resources to go to college and get a master's and a PhD, and Central Asian fellows. The excuse me, the memoir I wrote, Known and Unknown, the title came from a serious process where I used Herman Kahn's technique, where he takes a piece of paper, draws a line across it. He used to do this. He's long gone, but was an interesting friend of mine. And he'd put a whole lot of ideas about something he was working on. So I decided the title of the book, I'd start getting everyone's ideas for titles. And I'd take one and roll it around in my head a bit, and then I'd put it below the line. And then I'd look at the book below, never throw them out. And then I'd look at one below the line and say, that's not bad. I'll put it back above the line. Well, finally I came up with Known and Unknown. I was worried it was a little Orwellian. It came from a press conference I had in the Pentagon where I was trying to describe the problem of intelligence, and I said that there are known knowns, the things we know. There are known unknowns, the things we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know, and they're the ones that get you. The last competitor to known and unknown was an old Wyoming saying that goes like this: dogs don't bark at parked cars. Now, I've been barked at a few times in my life, and my response to that is they do something to parked cars. But my wife said it's not elegant. You don't want to use that one. The second book I wrote was Rumsfeld's Rules, and I've been asked to talk a bit about it, which I'm happy to do. I'm told that at 81 years old, I'm getting a little garrulous, so I'll have to be careful, and I hope someone gives me the hook after 10 or 15 minutes so I can save time to respond to questions. But what Rumsfeld's rules were, first of all, they're not all rules. Second, they're certainly not Rumsfeld's. They're people a lot smarter than I am. But one day I was called back from NATO, where I was ambassador, and Gerald Ford had suddenly become president, the only man in history who had not run for president and had not run for vice president, and was serving in the Oval Office as the President of the United States. A person, I guess he was the only president I worked at who was a personal friend. We'd served in Congress together, and I'd helped manage his campaign for minority leader back in 1964. Wonderful human being, very honorable man. And of course, the reservoir of trust had been drained, and he helped refill it just because of his integrity and his decency and his talent as a legislator. But he was not an executive. And he asked me to be chair as transition, then he asked me to be chief of staff of the White House, and I didn't want to, but I'd been there for 4 years before that, but I finally agreed. And one day I was with him, and I made some comment. I don't know what it was. I might have said, Mr. President, if you're working off your inbox, you're working off the priorities of others. And the goal is to have them working off your outbox. Or I might have said, what you measure improves. In the military, they put it differently. They say you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And he asked me, and he said, well, what's that all about? And I said, well, my mom was a school teacher. And when I'd ask her what a word meant, she'd say, well, write it down, look it up, use it. So I started writing down words as a youngster, and I still do. Talk about a dutiful son. And I started keeping track of concepts or thoughts that I thought were of particular interest. Well, the president asked me to get them typed up. They were all in a file in cards and notes. And I did, and he wanted them passed out to the senior staff at the White House because he literally had climbed into an airplane going 500 miles an hour, and he didn't even know the crew. He'd only been vice president 15 minutes, a little longer. But it was a terribly difficult time for the country. And so I sent those around to the senior staff as he requested. And I must say that it's now been close to 40 years. I think that was 1974. There have been something like 40 years that those things have been circulating around basically in mimeograph form. I decided after I wrote my memoir that I kind of enjoyed writing a book and decided to put them together into a book. The book is kind of eclectic. It has chapters on negotiating, on wrestling, on the military, on business, various on capitalism. I got so disturbed about the last campaign and the quality of the discussion on capitalism that I decided to put in a chapter on that. As I walked around the Pentagon or businesses that I was involved in over the years, I'd see strategy on door after door. And the more I talked to people, the more it became very clear to me that everyone had a slightly different idea of what strategy was. And people didn't really appreciate how hard strategy is. It's hard for a lot of reasons, but the first reason is you don't have a strategy unless you know where you want to go. So you have to decide, these are your goals. And once you do that, someone's not going to like those goals, and they're going to disagree with you, whether you're in business or in government or in a family. And they're going to say, well, that's not the goal we ought to have. So it's risky to have a strategy because you have to begin with a goal. Then you have to decide what are the conditions, circumstances in which you're going to be pursuing that goal, and what course of action. I remember when I was in the pharmaceutical business, I decided to take a good portion of the data and make it public and put it in the quarterly and annual reports so the shareholders could look and see what I thought was important, what we were trying to improve, because that's what we were measuring, and then taking the risk that you'll fall short and the numbers won't get better, they'll get worse. So strategy is not easy, and I thought I'd do a chapter on that, which I did. The ideas that are in the book are things that I noticed this is a leadership conference, and I've had the privilege of attending one or two others of these conferences, and I was looking at the schedule you have and was most impressed. One of the rules in the book I learned as a young Navy pilot, in the flight manual of an old SNJ, all the planes I flew are now hanging from the ceilings of museums. And but there used to be a little training plane called an SNJ, and what it said in the manual was, if you're lost, climb, conserve, and confess. Not bad. There's some folks in Washington who could learn from that. But what it meant was you get some altitude, so you can, if you need to, you can find a field and get down. So you climb. Conserve is you put your fuel back low, so you have the maximum amount of time to cruise and figure out what you might be doing. And then confess. Get on the radio and say, I am lost. And that's hard. But it's not bad advice for all of us from time to time to get to that point where you're willing to say that. And certainly it's a thought with respect to leadership. The first thing I'd say about leadership is the world is really run by people who show up. People say to me, oh, this, that, and the other thing, and we all recognize how important governance is. I'm from Illinois, and when I hear people talk about corruption in other countries, I think that in my adult life, I think we've had 4 go to the slammer, governors. And so it is important that we show up. And if people say, well, what are we going to do, and wring our hands, and isn't everything horrible? The place to solve the problem is by looking in the mirror, because it is each of us, individuals, human beings who have this amazing opportunity to help guide and direct the course of our government, of our country, that creates the environment within which we all function. And so that thought that the world is run by those who show up is an interesting one. Another thought, I was with a fellow the other day on a panel at the Truman Library, and what did I say that made you leave? Like, is that your knapsack you're taking, or the fellow I was with, he said, you know, if you're a leader and you're walking down the road and no one's following you, you're not a leader, you're just out taking a walk. And the other thought in there, of course, on this subject is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. When I got married, my wife's father said to me, Don, if you're coasting, you're going downhill, which is true. One night I was in Tel Aviv with Shimon Peres having dinner at a Chinese restaurant with my youngest daughter. And the three of us were sitting there eating Chinese food in this. He had been Minister of Defense when I was Secretary of Defense back in the 70s. And we were talking about the Middle East and what was going on. And he said very simply, Don, if a problem has no solution, it's not a problem, it's a fact. Not to be solved, but to be coped with over time, which I think has some validity. It's worth thinking about. Bill Bennett, who's a friend, one day said to me, you know, if you really want to know what's going on, you give it the gate test. I said, well, what's the gate test? He said, well, you pick up the gate and see which way things are moving. And if you think about that, it's true of money. Money's a coward. Money leaves a place that's inhospitable and finds a place that's marginally more hospitable. Human beings leave places that are less hospitable and move to places that are more hospitable. And it doesn't take a genius to do that, to look at the flow, look at the direction things are moving. I remember Maryland recently passed a millionaire's tax, and they were receiving so much revenue for X number of millionaires. They passed the tax, and the revenue didn't go up, the revenue went down. Why? Because the millionaires left. And they were surprised. How can you be surprised? My favorite photograph is a satellite photo of the Korean Peninsula. And I've got a picture of it in my book, and it tells it all. I mean, there's this little peninsula with a demilitarized zone across the middle, the same people in the north and the south, the same resources in the north and south, the same culture, the same language in the north and the south, the same neighbors. And in the south, since the Korean War, they have become the 13th biggest economy on the face of the earth. And in the north, they're starving. The satellite photo shows at night electricity throughout South Korea and along the coast. And in the north, it's pitch black, except for a pinprick of light in the capital city of Pyongyang. That tells us that, and the only difference really is that in the South they have a free political system and a free economic system. And in the North they have a dictatorship. And what's a dictator do? He gets up every morning and tries to figure out how he's going to perpetuate himself in office. That's his job. Winston Churchill put it well. He said, a dictator rides a tiger and he's afraid to get off. And it's true. And the only way to stay in power as a dictator is to repress. And that's what's happening in that part of the world. And people want to flee. If you give it the gate test, they're constantly trying to get out of that country and escape. One other thought on leadership is, you know, it is perfectly possible to proceed perfectly logically from an inaccurate premise to an inaccurate conclusion. And it happens a lot. I think also it's important to remember that one should beware of ideas that are bold, innovative, and new. It is perfectly possible to have an idea that is bold, innovative, new, and stupid. Mrs. Thatcher once said that the only trouble with socialism is that pretty soon you run out of other people's money, which of course has a lot of truth. A thought that I think it was Toynbee said, that civilizations die from suicide, not murder. That is to say that human beings in a civilization have that responsibility themselves to either see that it flourishes and grows, or that bad decisions are made, bad governance exists, and it dies of its own, in effect, suicide. Well, of course, one of my last rules is if you have rules, never have more than 10. I think in the book there's something like 283. So actually the final rule is that all generalizations are wrong, including this one. Now, what I thought I'd do is stop. I'm having trouble seeing, folks. I don't know how you're going to handle the questions and answers. I know how I'll handle the answers. I'll answer the questions I know the answer to, and I'll respond to the others. But I can't see out there to see a hand. How do we do this?
Thank you, Mr. Rumsfeld, very much. Thank you. We have a couple of students with microphones. The students will find the questions. If you raise your hand and keep it up, we'll come to you and ask away.
Good.
Well, thank you
The
very
questions
much.
need not be on my book. Although that'd be nice. I ought to say one other thing about my first book, the memoir, Known and Unknown. All the proceeds go to military charities, so don't be shy. Don't be shy. You can get out your Christmas card list and send it to all your friends. And I can say that without any embarrassment. Yes.
First of all, very grateful that you're here. I do have one prideful thing to say that I have in common with you. My grandparents and my parents and my brother and sister and I are all alma maters of New Trier.
Is that right? New
Yes.
Trier High School.
Yeah, and
Here's to our team. They're the green and the gray.
my father was always, yeah.
They were called the Indians, but they had
We're
to
not allowed to do
change
that
to
anymore.
Trevians.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my father, whenever we would go visit my mother at Winnetka Community Church, he said, "David, over there are the parents of a great man." And so we would always say hello to your parents as well.
Well, my goodness, thank you.
The Tea Party.
My sister still goes there.
Yeah, well, I'd probably meet her
fact,
once in a
she-
while there. The Tea Party, which started out as a tax revolt, has, I think, become, to many people, synonymous with...
Before you go on, you know, one time I was at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, and Dolly Parton and I were on the stage. And I walked up, and she said, "Well, I'd like to have you say a few words to the audience." And she had the mic. And so I reached for the mic. And an old pro like that, she held on to the mic. And I ended up, for the first phrase, sounding like you sound. Like the mic isn't near your face. It's too far away.
All right.
So I finally wrestled it away from Dolly Parton. And my advice to you is do the same.
Oh, Megan, I'd love to wrestle you, but not right now.
When you said we had something in common, I thought you were going to say you were an all-Navy wrestling champion.
Oh, God. So what I wanted to ask you is this. The Tea Party, which started out as obviously a tax revolt, has become synonymous, I think, in
It started out as what?
a tax revolt.
Oh, a tax revolt.
Tax enough already. But it has become synonymous with what I think many people, certainly not everybody here, but many people consider to be the non-compromising Bible-thumping far right. I think that, yes, I know there's some of you disagree with that. But
I think that's what the president said, something like they like their guns and their Bibles.
well, what's happening of late is I think we can see a revisionist Republican Party that is proposing candidates that are non-Tea Partyists, more moderate. My question to you is, number one, is this a positive path strategy for the Republicans to come back into government? And also, can we be moderate and still be faithful to conservative values?
Well, that is a tough question, and for someone who's really been out of politics for a good many years, I would hearken back to a couple of thoughts. When I was living in Brussels as ambassador to NATO, I watched these countries that had multi-party systems, and they were weak. Any small party could pull them down and change the government. So one time when I was there, I think the Netherlands had no government for 6 months because it pulled apart. So I believe in a two-party system. And I also believe in the energy and the vitality that the Tea Party people have brought to the country. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said he believed in the big tent. And we have to believe in a big tent. If you believe in a two-party system, and if you want to govern, what you have to do is see that that party becomes as much like you would want it to be as is humanly possible, given the fact, what do we have, 312 or 15 million people in this country? We're all going to have somewhat different views, but I think it was Bill Buckley said, who am I for? I am for the most conservative person who can get elected. And that, it seems to me, is not an unreasonable position. We're not going to always prevail, what our particular views might be, but by golly, we are responsible for guiding and directing the course of this country. And the only way that can happen is if we get out of our chairs, understand how enormously important what's happening is, and participate. And out of that process, and I give enormous credit to the Tea Party folks, a lot of whom are close friends of mine, for what they have brought by way of energy and vitality and thoughtfulness to the public dialogue on important issues. Does that answer your question?
You know, I think the chances are of the Tea Party, I think there's so much negativity towards the rabid right, and I say that cautiously, but I wonder, are we going to be able to get elected? And if we can't get elected...
Well, if you can't get elected, you can't govern. And if you can't govern, somebody else is going to govern. And the people who are going to be governing are going to be people without our values, without our interests, and in too many instances, governing in a way that, in my view, would not be in the best interest of the country. So what we have to do is recognize that sure, we can stick with our values. It's important that we do. Certainly Ronald Reagan did. And I think that the one thing I will say is that everything we say or do is trumpeted to the country through the mainstream media. And it comes out in a way that is often not in favor of the kind of ideas that I have or the values that I prefer and recommend and urge. And that ought not to cow us. Indeed, it ought to energize us. It ought to cause us to stand up and say, by golly, they can say what they want about it, they can twist it, But it isn't going to slow me down. Dogs don't bark at parked cars.
Secretary Rumsfeld, I'm looking at a letter dated April 15th, 14, to our beloved IRS over your signature. And if I may quote from it, I assume it's accurate. I hope that at some point in my lifetime, and I'm now in my 80s, so there are not many years left, the U.S. government will simplify the U.S. tax code so that those citizens who sincerely want to pay what they should are able to do it right and know that they have done it right. So my question is...
He left out the first part of my letter.
Well, it's a long letter.
Every,
I'll read it all if you
yeah,
like.
but it's a good one.
It is a good. Do you remain hopeful?
Every year I write the IRS and say, here are my taxes. I don't have the vaguest idea if they're accurate. I went to college, I hire an accountant, I want them to be accurate, but the thing is so complicated I can't promise you that they're accurate. If you have any questions, give me a call. Now, what do I think? Will the tax code get simplified? Certainly not with this government. But it has to be. It is absolutely irresponsible for a country like ours to have a tax code that is so big, so thick, so complex that people cannot know whether or not what they're doing is correct. I put a PS and said my wife also signed this. She also went to college and she also doesn't have the vaguest idea if it's accurate. But we have to do it. We have no excuse as responsible citizens to not simplify it and go to some kind of a flat tax. Question?
Yes, Mr. Rumsfeld, right here.
Yes.
It's an honor to be in the presence of such a great patriot, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to serve, believe
Thank
me.
you. One of my fondest memories of you is, I think, during the beginning of the Afghanistan war, during the Pentagon press briefings. And I think it could have been pay-per-view because it was such a delight for me to see you handle with such deftness, intelligence, and grace the weenies of the Pentagon press corps. So I just wanted to tell you I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you. I wish my wife Joyce were here to hear that. I'd get home at night and she'd say, how does all that stuff come out of your mouth?
Sir, would you speak about the the diminishing of our armed forces?
Yes, sir. What's happened is throughout America's history, we have, after World War I, we built up during the war, and then we pared back dramatically and became really, truly a third-rate power, military power. In World War II, we built up. At the end of the war, we pulled down dramatically. At the Korean War, we had to build up, and then at the end of that, we pulled down. It's happened every single time. When I got out of the Navy and went to Washington to work on Capitol Hill, it was 1957. Eisenhower was president. In Eisenhower's presidency, we were spending 10% of gross national product on defense. Same thing was basically true in the Kennedy and Johnson, all that period, Republicans, Democrats, about 10% of GDP. Today, we're spending less than 4% of GDP. And our allies are spending less than 2% in NATO and Western Europe. Now, I think it was Sun Tzu who said the best war is the one that doesn't have to be fought. For most of my adult life, the United States has been a factor in the world. It's been contributed to the rib cage. Not as policemen of the world, we can't do that. We don't have the ability to nation build. But we've been a factor. And an important factor. The signal that's gone out in recent years is that, first of all, we're not capable or don't care about managing our economy in a responsible way. And therefore, we are racking up debts and deficits that tell the world that we're going to be less as a nation in the next 2 decades than we've been in the earlier period. And that's a dangerous signal. Then they see the sequestration of the Defense Department budget and the reductions that are taking place in the budgets. And they say, well, the United States is just simply withdrawing. And why else, if you're in decline, why else would Vice President Biden have to stand up and say, we're not in decline? He had to say that because we are. We're not behaving as a factor in the world. Now, what does that do? Nature abhors a vacuum. We're creating a leadership vacuum across the globe, which means that that vacuum is going to be filled by people who have totally different values and don't have our interests and will be doing and deciding to do things that they otherwise wouldn't even think of doing. No one here thought, gee, maybe I'll fly over from my hotel to this hotel today, because you can't fly. Any country across the globe, if it's some country that has totally different views from ours, they are encouraged to do things that they otherwise wouldn't think of doing because they see weakness. Friends and allies, when we go to them, I mean, think of when President Obama went to a Friends and Allies about Syria. I don't know, 20, 30,000 people had been killed by that time, and he tried to put together a coalition, and no one would follow him. He didn't ever actually articulate a mission. Now I think it's something like 140,000, they announced today, have been killed in Syria. And I guess that my worry is that the countries of the world are shifting their focus, and clearly Mr. Putin believes he can do pretty much what he wants to do. And so he gets up in the morning and decides what he wants to do. And he's interested in kind of reasserting Russian interest in authorities over the former Soviet republics and what they call the near abroad. And you find him putting pressure on them in one day. I mean, if you were in Central Asia or the old Warsaw Bloc countries that aren't in NATO, you'd have to worry. What's next? I mean, Churchill, I think, said the trouble with it's like feeding an alligator hoping it eats you last. You can only do so many things, and you've created an impression. You've created an understanding in the world that you have decided to withdraw and to pull back and to not have the financial wherewithal and to not have the military wherewithal to provide the kind of deterrent and dissuasion. Because weakness is provocative. Weakness invites people into doing things they wouldn't even think of doing otherwise. So, as you may have surmised from my response, I have a minimum of high regard for what's taking place. Question?
Secretary Rumsfeld? Secretary Rumsfeld?
Yes, sir.
Again, thank you very, very much for your service. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, with all the experience you've had, all the people you've been around, all the leaders and wannabe leaders, what characteristics do you see that are needed in the secretaries and the senators, in the congressmen, on our side of the argument that are lacking today? Do I make myself clear, or am I?
Yeah, but, well, I'm plucky, but I'm not stupid.
No.
You want me to issue a blanket indictment?
No. I was just wondering if there are certain things
I'm
that...
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm happy to respond. First, we'll take the members of the Congress. They are each elected separately in a different constituency. They raise their own money. They're not beholden to the party or the leadership of the party. I think Boehner has got one of the toughest jobs in the world, and Mitch McConnell, trying to keep everyone focused and going in generally the right direction, because they don't have to do that. They're independent of that leadership. And now, what does that mean? Well, take a committee hearing, any hearing, the hearing on the IRS or the hearing on Benghazi. What you see is a group of individuals who know that they are going to run for re-election. They know they have to raise money to win re-election. They know to raise money, people have to know who you are. How do they know who you are? Through television. So what do? You say something on television in a committee hearing. Now, the only way you can actually manage a hearing with a cabinet officer sitting down there and you're running a hearing, the way to do it is to have 1 or 2 or 3 people ask all the questions. Instead of having people pop in and pop out and say, I'm sorry, I have to leave, and I just came in from another committee meeting, and then read a question that their staff prepared, you have to be willing to have a person given enough time that they can ask a question of the witness, they can listen to the answer. Listening is a very gracious art. And then ask a question off that question. Whereas if each person's allocated 3 minutes all the way around the room, it never happens. So I think the thing that has to be done, now take this select committee that's just been appointed in the Congress, they're going to have to get a chief counsel, and they're going to have to reduce dramatically the amount of time that each member has and focus so that you can actually pursue a line of questioning that can get to the bottom of something. And you can't do it if everyone's got free play. With respect to the executive branch, I was having lunch one time with Bibi Netanyahu, and he said, we got talking about coalitions. And we've seen, just in the last 2 decades, all kinds of coalitions. Major organizations are coalitions. The UN's a coalition, NATO's a coalition. But the thing to remember is that the mission has to determine the coalition. The coalition can't determine the mission. If the coalition comes together for reasons other than the purpose that is at hand, they're not going to agree to it. I mean, the UN, what can it do? It can give speeches. But it's so big, and there are so many different perspectives and views in there, and there's so many countries that have vetoes, that the idea that quote, coalition can deal with problems like piracy or the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or some of the major issues that the world faces, it's very clear that they are not able to. So what has to be done is a leader has to provide clarity of vision, articulate a specific mission, and then go out and find countries that are willing to support that mission. The point being that the mission has to determine the coalition. Seems to me if you're talking about the executive branch, what we have to do is, or political leaders outside of Congress, they have to decide directionally what's important, what needs to be done, provide sufficient clarity of vision, and then recruit people to support that mission. And recognize that only if they do that are we likely to move the ball down the field. And clearly, to the extent that people are working at cross purposes or don't agree with the coalition's mission, or end up feeling that they didn't have a voice in that mission, they didn't sign up to do that, if you will. I was struck during the Bush administration that he was constantly accused of being a unilateralist. He put together a coalition of over 90 countries to support the global war on terror. and cooperate through their FBIs, cooperate with respect to tracking financial transactions. Then there were probably 30 some odd that were in the coalition to deal with Afghanistan, 30 countries, not the UN, not NATO, but a clear purpose and 30 plus countries that got involved. Eventually NATO did come in and get involved. Same thing with Iraq, 25 or 30 countries there came together. I think 52 countries came together with respect to the Proliferation Security Initiative. And when we were putting that together, I would go around to a country and say, look, here's where we're going. Here's what we want to do. We want your help. We'll take your help on any basis you want. If your political situation is such that you can't do it publicly, fair enough. Don't do it publicly. If your situation is that you can help with this part of it but not that part of it, fine. We'll take that. And fashion a coalition of people that are generally moving in a certain direction, and accept the fact that they're all different than we are. They have different histories, different cultures, different languages, different neighbors, different political circumstances, and don't expect them all to be like we are. I mean, we're not like we were. This country had slaves into the 1800s. Women didn't vote into the 1900s. We're evolving. They're evolving. And the idea that they should all be exactly like us or agree with us on things in every case, I think is terribly unrealistic. Question. Did that answer that question?
Mr. Rumsfeld?
Yes, sir.
2016 is coming up. Can we, the Republican Party, beat Hillary in 2016? And if so, what kind of candidate do we need?
Well, I can't imagine. First of all, let me say that I'm not big on dynasties. With over 300 million people, we ought to have more than 2 or 3 families that can produce people who can lead in this country. Second, I think she was a rather poor Secretary of State. So if 2 legs of her stool, one is dynasty and the other is the Department of State, she'd have to have a wonderful 3rd leg of that stool. I can't imagine, really cannot imagine the country electing her. Now, what I think I've already answered the other part of the question is, what does the Republican Party need? They need somebody who is a leader, somebody who's capable of deciding which way to go, and then having the skill sets to go out and create a coalition of people who want to go in that direction, and being persuasive and finding ways to get each of you, each of us, out of our chairs, understanding how important this next election is. I mean, what the damage that can be done in 8 years is enormous. You add 4 more, and it's a quite different world. And I mean, the people that are getting sprinkled throughout the executive branch are people who are not going to get up in the morning and walk the same direction you may be or I may be. So I think it's what someone said to me, well, who are you for? And I said, I want to watch them run around the track. I want to see them show their stuff. I want to see them under attack and see how they respond. I want them to deal with tough issues and find a way to do it effectively. And become that kind of a leader that will energize the people who generally have the kinds of views that I have. And I'm willing to invest the time and effort to do that. And watch them go and help them go, and then land on one of them and break my neck trying to get him or her elected. Question?
Between Russia and China, which one do you think is our greater foreign rival?
You know, we look at those two countries. Take Russia. Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons. It also has a not an impressive military. They're conscripts. Most of them don't want to be there. They're not well educated. They're not well disciplined. Except for energy, the Russian economy is modest. Many countries around the world don't like Russians, and because of their pressures that it puts on them, they can be responsive to that pressure, and they will be responsive to that pressure. But they don't like them. They don't want to receive that pressure, let me put it that way. Alcoholism's a serious problem. They've got a brain-out drain. I think it's the first modern industrialized country where the life expectancy of males has actually declined. Are they well led? Yes. There's no question but that Putin is punching way above his weight class. And we're punching well below. Take China. China's got problems. The one baby problem was a big mistake. They've got, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 million men with no women. They've got a disparity of wealth from the coast to the inner part of their country. They've still got all these large government communist corporations that are going to have to be broken up at some point, and the people let go. And when the people are let go, they're going to have to put security people in there. They've got a problem because they have want to grow their economy at a good clip. And to do that, you're going to have to allow a lot of foreigners in your country and a lot of iPads and telephones, cell phones, and a freer bit of energy. And they have a communist dictatorship, which does not benefit from computers and people have the ability to organize and so forth. So there's going to be a tension. And if they want to grow the way they've been growing, they're going to have to give up something and have some things that are not compatible to their political dictatorship, communist dictatorship. So each of those, and it has, on the plus side, it has central leadership. I mean, the mischief they're making in the South China Sea is an enormous problem right now. It's affecting all of our friends and allies there. South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Australia, the Philippines, Vietnam. Vietnam think of the countries that have border problems with China. Vietnam does, India does. Other countries around the periphery of China constantly feel the pressure. So which is the major problem? If we manage our affairs well, we are a wealthy country. We have the ability to not to do everything, but to do everything that's necessary and appropriate, and to create a rib cage in the world that deters and dissuades either one or both of those countries from engaging in excessive mischief and harm to our values and our friends and our allies. I think that we have to expect that each will be attempting to expand, each will be attempting to exert influence, and to the extent we adopt a policy of mismanaging our economy, reducing our defense investments, behaving in a way that discourages our friends and allies, and creating the kind of weakness that is sufficiently provocative that it encourages the leadership in Russia and the People's Republic of China, we're going to lose. And as between the two, China clearly is bigger and has a much more rapidly growing economy and is double-digit investing in their defense. It also has those problems I've described. I think that it is going to depend basically on us, how we manage our affairs. And I think that each of those two countries and the problems they present to their neighbors and the world are manageable problems if we manage ourselves in a responsible way and pull up our socks and act like a great country.
This will be
Yes,
our
sir.
last question.
Mr. Rumsfeld, personal question. I know I'd be pleased if I could be counted among the handful of boogeymen from the left. From your standpoint, I'm guessing that when they say it's Bush's fault, it's Cheney's fault, it's Dick Rumsfeld's fault, you don't cry yourself to sleep at night. But how do you approach that? Do you just let that slough off, or are you happy to be a target for the left? Thank you.
You know, if you act like a welcome mat, people wipe their feet on you. And I never really learned to roll over and play dead dog. I get up every morning, and if I feel that what the things I believe in are basically right, even though I know some people are going to disagree with them, I'm perfectly willing to go out and say what I believe. And to the extent someone disagrees, at least they're thinking and they're wrong. I'm getting the hook. I can feel a presence on my left. So I'm not going to go home, wring my hands, and cry myself to sleep.
Thank you. I think you're going to go out this way and sign some books.